Okay, so I was invited to do some reflection and commemoration, and in particular on Dundas Street. And so what's following is my commentary on some pictures that I've taken along Dundas, and just some description of my experience. So uh, I want to name, first of all, that I found out today that Dundas was created in 1795 to be a military route to be able to have supplies and soldiers move. So from the beginning, it was a colonial project. It was a tool of separating relationship to land that people had developed over since time immemorial, basically. And I just named that because also, uh, in like in Toronto, violence is often subsumed or erased, or like the fact that I lived on the street for so long and I just found out today that it was specifically a military route is an example of how our violent history is kind of hidden from us. And in the Canadian context, we love to contrast ourselves. I'm sure you've had this experience, Ariel, by hearing how different we are from our neighbors to the south and how less violent we are and nice and polite and everything. So the first thing I wanted to show was uh, this is a screenshot from a post I made on Instagram where this is at the corner of Spadina and Dundas. Um, First of all, that's me, Julian Diego. Like I said, I've come from a mix of Northern European and Caribbean cultures. But here we are. So this is the corner of Spadina and Dundas, and we see a street light, and it starts off, happy, and then it gives you like 52 seconds. Like that's amazing, right? Like, and when you think about the grannies in the neighborhood and everything, you're like, oh, wow, that's a long time, but that's nice for them to be able to get across because there is a lot of seniors in the neighborhood. However, when we count down to 50, all of a sudden it drops to 9 seconds. So literally, you're halfway across the street at this point, thinking you have all the time in the world. And what's interesting is that if you were to get hit by a car, you would be the car would not be at fault because you're in the middle of the road with the flashing the countdown happening. So we're actually in the situation where we're inviting people into harm and uh, like structurally. And yes, I know this wasn't intentional. I'm sure it got repaired, but this was up long enough for me to notice it, notice it again, notice it again, and say, you know what? Let me take a video. Because I cross this corner all the time. So I'm just kind of using that as a metaphor for a bit of the false narratives that have been created around Dundas and Toronto, which I think this project is helping us kind of speak into. And so there, yeah, so then we count down to 2. All right, so this is Alexandra Park, which is just to the south of Dundas and east of Bathurst. And I took this picture 2 years ago. And when I think about the origin of Dundas, what I really like it is because of this piece of graffiti underneath us, um, which says "Between equal rights, force decides." And so, like, not much has changed, right? Like, and this is particularly because at the time there was an encampment of people who were homeless. And now I used to work in the shelter system, and I'm aware of like why people. I'm aware of a lot of the challenges to homelessness. I'm aware of the risks that being inside a shelter during a pandemic provides. I'm aware of the separation of families and pets and all. There's a whole host of reasons that people choose an encampment as the safest option to present. Um, I'm just situating this again against the background of the origin of the street, which is about separating people from them. So they did the sweeps of the enclosures, and funnily, there's this sign here. And then I did this really awkward project because I'm standing watching literally millions of dollars being spent on security to sweep all these people, and I wanted to record it in some way. And so I went up to each of the security guards, and I'm like, "Do you mind if I take a picture of your hands? Uh, because hands are very significant. They're anonymous, but they also are very powerful. Like literally, your hands are on this, right? Like literally, like we talk about putting your hands on something. We talk about, labor as being reflective of your hands, and definitely there's ableist connotations to that. But just to me, the hands itself is pretty interesting. And then the dynamic of talking to people about, I just want to record this moment, uh, and without directly implicating you. But most people said no, and it was interesting. But anyway, so I want to show some hands. People that were out here clearing out our park. And it was a very diverse group of primarily young men, but also some young women too. And this is guys representing the media. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about having come up in this history and present. What is my relationship to Dundas Street? So Dundas was actually one of the places where I got my first long-term housing. And it was a place where I switched careers that set me onto the trajectory to where I'm at now. So it was a major transition point. And it was only recently that I came to understand about the individual that it's named after. But I wanted to include this image of my kids because my son on the left was actually born on Dundas Street. And we ended up at the hospital at the last minute, but the vast majority of the labor and everything happened on Dundas. And when you live for a long time or are born on Dundas Street, you actually get the name Dundas attached to you as a signifier. Because how much ID wants your address on it? My OHIP card, my taxes, like your address is actually a big signifier. It makes you unique, anyways, in the eyes of the government. So actually, my two sons at one point had attached to their identity the name of a man who literally, for at least one or two generations, prolonged slavery in the British Empire and including in Canada, which I just want to name because I don't think we talked about it yet. Slavery, like Canada was a country that had slaves and was a big part of the colonial project. So what is my relationship? Boys coming up, and they travel across the street every day, thousands of times. It was one of the landmarks for them to find their way. Like when they're going somewhere, if you've gone up to Dundas, you've gone too far. Something I used to say, right if they're coming up from Queen or something. So I want to switch from the morbid history to talk about what I want for these guys a little bit. And they're also both very creative, artistic people. And so another thing that I saw on Dundas is I used to, fall asleep to the sound of the streetcars going by. And here's maybe a changing of the story a little bit. Just these faces, these names, the word supports Black artists is actually in big contravention to a military route around to go out and subjugate people. So maybe this is the beginning of a shift. And the storytelling part and narrative is so much about what's so important about this. Further along, this is my dear friend Sandra Brewster's work. And so having her situated at the AGO changed my relationship to that building, partially because she, you give an artist talk and you talk about all your influences, right? At least half of her influences were artists in Toronto. She wasn't talking about like, yes, I like this one Italian artist from back in the day, whatever. She included them, but she also named people that were part of her trajectory, which actually made it part of the canon, so to speak. So it's a way that we're starting to introduce and legitimize our stories. And interestingly, is that this picture, part of the deal is because it's an image transfer. She got them to do it on a supporting wall, and the agreement was that it couldn't be removed; it had to be painted over. And the reason she wanted to paint it over when at the end of the exhibit is to know always that this image would be here, because this is a person who I also know by the name of Tuku, who's the daughter of Salome Bay, who's actually part of Black Toronto arts royalty. So somewhere hidden in the AGO will always, as long as that structural wall retains, will always be that. It's almost like an invisible hieroglyphic or something that's tying the Black community, the arts community, to Dundas and to storytelling. I know I'm going on, guys, so I'm going to try and get through it. The other thing, and there's Sandra showing off and beaming that fantastic smile she's got. Okay, so the other thing that I want to name, my other major connection to Dundas, is actually a club by the name of Panglak Kung Fu, which was created in response to white supremacist violence in the late 50s and 60s. So this was a club that a number of Chinese immigrants created, like I said, in 1961, and it endures to this day. And it's a place of great joy and development and beauty. We have like these lions happening, and we go out there. We've gone out there since I've been there twice a year, once for the club anniversary and once for Chinese New Year, where we go out and we do the dance for all the shops along Dundas between, as far as the Geo and maybe as far west as like Augusta or something like that, and then up in Spadina. And it's an activity that's about renewal, about cleansing away bad energy, about bringing a lot of noise and color to it, and we do it in all seasons. So out there. And I'll just finish off with this. This is the front of the club, and hopefully, if I brought in any heavy energy from this conversation, this little celebration of the year of the rat will bring some noise and color to help cleanse the palate and get us back onto like whatever, wherever we need to be. Oh, so the last thing I want to say is during the pandemic, because we couldn't work out inside, the club moved outside. So we were teaching winter. That's my son, Kehara, took that picture. And then we also expanded to do a whole bunch of like fun activities that we couldn't do inside, including fire spinning. So again, some movement across Dundas from the north side to the south side and into the open space provided a lot of expansive possibility. And thus ends my sharing. Thanks, guys.